Hi there, and welcome back to Sci-Versed and the very first episode of Season 3. We are a podcast all about science, popular culture, and entertainment. This podcast is for everyone, no matter if you're a zookeeper or a marine biologist enthusiast. We are your hosts, Ella
and Isabel, two science communicators and Solarpunk enthusiasts, taking this podcast on a journey into hopeful futures this season.
Hell yeah.
So this episode, for our first one of Season 3, we are talking about Solarpunk Systems. So that's going to be building on our final episode from Season 1, and we're going to talk about what it means to be a Solarpunk system and some really cool examples we've seen in both fiction and in real life, and the sorts of future systems that could maybe arise from a combination of both.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we dive into it, it's really important to us that we acknowledge that this episode of Sci-Versed is being recorded on Ngunnawal country, and here's an acknowledgement of country in language. Dawra Nuna, Dawra Ngunnawal, Yangu Nalimanyin, Dunimanyin, Ngunnawal Wari, Dawa Wari, Dindi, Wangirilijin Yin. This is Ngunnawal country. Today, we are all meeting together on Ngunnawal country. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the elders. And we extend those respects to all traditional custodians of all the lands you might be listening or watching this episode on. So, welcome to our very, very first episode of Season 3, all about Solarpunk. We are going to dive just into a little quick Solarpunk recap at the top of this episode. And don't worry, we've designed this episode to still make complete sense for you, whether you've seen any of our previous episodes on Solarpunk. If you've ever heard the word before, maybe you've started to explore it already, it's going to kind of make sense for you on all those different levels and layers of exploration. So Solarpunk is a genre, aesthetic and movement that envisions a sustainable future where community, technology, and the natural environment all together live in harmony. Solarpunk uses science fiction a lot of the time as a lens to tell stories about regenerating ecosystems, about futuristic permaculture farming, mutual aid networks, and sustainable urban living. The really cool thing about Solarpunk that we love so much is that it actually, as an imagining of the future, has potential to drive action and excitement towards real-world systems.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, is those systems that make up Solarpunk and how they actually create the future of our community and the future of our technologies and ecosystems. So, yeah, the systems are kind of like the method of getting there and also the thing that sustains us while we're in that really, really positive future. And Isabel and I are interested in this because we care so much about what our future looks like.
Yeah, we do.
And not just our personal future, but the future of this planet, our friends, our community, even the technologies, the animals, the environment. We care about all of it. And Solarpunk is kind of that awesome. I would dare posit at the top of this episode, Solarpunk is that awesome system.
Yeah,
that can get us there.
And I think definitely Australia and probably the rest of the world is really in the mood for some positivity right now, and
I am.
Action, some like real world action, and getting out of that sort of climate doomerism negativity, and that's what like Solarpunk is all about. And one of the interesting things about Solarpunk stories is that they often highlight systems that are already in place rather than starting from scratch, which actually makes it feel more like an attainable and accessible future.
Yeah, Solarpunk is really about showing how we can get there. It's not supposed to be so futuristic and idealistic that it's never going to happen. It's actually based on the now and is something that we should be able to achieve.
Yeah, and it also presents many possible options rather than just one solution, which I really like. It's sort of a container, I guess, for possible futures.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I really like it. And what made me think of that was a book or like a short story, short piece of writing that Ella actually gifted me last year, which is Ursula Le Guin's carrier bag theory of fiction. And it's this idea that fiction can be a really useful and powerful container for anyone to place their ideas about the future inside of and play and experiment with, I guess almost like a lab, like a different kind of lab than a,
Yeah, it's almost like
physical
a
one.
democratization of ideas and futures
Yes.
rather than it, having to come from, say, like a lab or an institution. Like fiction can be the thing that carries all those components.
Yes. And so like what we were saying before, key part of Solarpunk is that these hopeful futures should be obtainable to us in reality and also focused on progressing together. So systems for all rather than a system that works for one person or puts like a certain group of people in power and doesn't help everyone else.
Yeah, I think when Solarpunk references community, the community, let's just make explicitly clear, like, is for everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, not just the majority.
Yeah. So I thought I could go over a few elements of what make up a Solarpunk system before we dive into some examples that we've seen. And this is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the sort of key elements that I think come to mind off the top of my head and also from a little bit of research. So the first one is decolonize knowledge, ways and practices, which I think we talked a little bit about in the intro episode to this season.
Yeah.
Another one is community-focused knowledges and systems, also crowdsourcing, which we'll get into a bit later. Again, the harmony between community, environment and technology, also super important. Egalitarianism and decentralization. So there's also a focus on racial and gender equality. And we'll see that in some of the fiction that I'm going to talk about in a bit. Also elements like permaculture and rewilding, positive psychology, which is one of my favorites. I think one of Ella's favorites too. DIY ethos and also a post-capitalism social model.
Wow, all that and more.
Yeah, all that and more. I think let's talk about some examples.
Oh, yes, please.
So this episode, we're going to break it up into fictional systems, current systems, and future systems that are kind of a mix of the previous two.
Yeah, so like all good messages, this podcast is coming to you in 3 parts, followed by a good news section, which you'll have to wait to the end for.
Yes.
But we're going to kick things off talking about fictional Solarpunk systems.
Yes. So I wanted to talk about 2 we have actually brought up before and then a few we haven't, because I think talking about previous ones just helps us refresh our memory a little bit and remind everyone. So the first fictional Solarpunk system is Wakanda from the Black Panther comics and Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so this one is a fictional African nation with advanced technology, resource management, and a focus on a harmonious relationship with nature. I feel like a lot of our listeners might have read the comics or even seen the movies. The movies were quite popular.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah. And I'm sure like if you've seen the movie or like read the comics, you can see the picture of the mountains and the water bodies and how it all sort of intertwines with the buildings. And so the things that make Wakanda a Solarpunk system are, like I said, the futuristic technology and buildings integrated with nature. So it incorporates the mountains and water bodies as part of the architecture. It also very much embraces the idea that communities can become technologically advanced while also restoring and maintaining a relationship with the environment. It is possible. We don't have to destroy everything in the process.
Oh, what a beautiful dream that is.
Yeah. And another interesting thing about it is that it's a world untouched by colonialism and Western capitalism.
Yeah. So despite it looking much like a Western city, there's actually so many parts of it that defy ideals of capitalism and ideals of like growth upon growth upon growth.
Yes.
Again, that harmonious nature is really bringing into balance a lot of elements of that city.
And there's a nod to like African heritage and ingenuity thrives through a merger of advanced technology and traditional knowledges with nature. I think the one thing about it that I've noticed that kind of makes it not solarpunk is that they have a king.
Yeah,
that's
hierarchy like that isn't really where solarpunk is heading. But the creators of, you know, that depiction of the city didn't necessarily label it as solarpunk.
Yeah.
This is kind of like a label that we're looking at it with because we can recognize a lot of those common elements and systems that would make up a solarpunk city or environment.
It's sort of one of those good ones to have as a visual, similar to some like Studio Ghibli aesthetics too, where it's like you can see the visual with the like vast landscapes and some of the like renewable tech, but it's not explicitly labeled as solarpunk.
But it's part of seeing the future and getting ourselves there, which is why we're talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. However, the next one I'm going to talk about is explicitly solarpunk. It's labeled as this by the author, and that is Panga from the Monk and Robot duology.
If you haven't read Becky Chambers' Monk and Robot duology, I think that's where I'd recommend to start with your solarpunk fiction.
Yeah, they're really easy to read and they're novellas. So I think they're around 150, 170 pages. So they're short.
And they're feel good. So you come away feeling like self-reflective and happier. And I came away from it feeling a little more at peace. So they're quite happy reads. And that is something that we see a lot in the solarpunk genre.
Yeah, for sure. So Panga as a solarpunk system is a fictional moon, which I love that idea.
So good.
With an explicitly solarpunk society. And the basic premise is it's set in a future where robots have achieved self-awareness and returned to the forests and nature and have become sort of the stuff of myths and legends until one day a robot decides to reveal itself to an unsuspecting human. And I'm not going to say anything else because I don't want to spoil the story for you about the premise, but some of the things that make the world of Panga a solarpunk system include that harmony between community, technology, and the natural environment again. And the technology includes self-aware technology like the robots and the natural environment, including like rewilding of the landscape. There's also very much an acceptance and celebration of gender, race, and culture in all its forms throughout like both the books, and not in a sort of like tokenistic way.
In quite a meaningful, long-lasting, you don't just see it once throughout the book, you see it pop up time and time again.
Yeah. Another aspect is the sustainable transport and sustainable housing. So the main character sort of moves around in this oxbike wagon, and there are people in the book who live in these biodegradable houses made of fungus, which is pretty interesting.
Pretty cool.
There are also several self-sustaining walkable communities and an alternative economic system. More on that later.
Absolutely more on that later. And also more on walkable communities in a later episode. Mm-hmm. Just putting a little pin in that. Another example I wanted to bring up here, and this is a new one, so don't worry if you haven't heard season 1. This references nothing to it or a season 1 episode on Solarpunk. But we wanted to talk a little bit about the book Ecotopia by Ernest Callenbach. And this was published back in 1975. And again, it's one of those novels that is later labeled as solarpunk, one of those works of fiction that people view it and they say, hey, this kind of represents all these ideals we were talking about. And the key way it does it is through the systems of this place, Ecotopia. And these systems are actually mind-blowing and make me feel so excited for a potential future that could have these types of systems. So Ecotopia is a place where there are community-based cottage hospitals, bringing in the medical world to a comfortable home environment that's very localized and yet specialized all at once. That honestly sounds so ideal.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Not only, like immediate acute injury, but also chronic disease management, which we know has to have a systematic approach taken, and it's something that Australia's own hospitals and healthcare system is struggling with right now. Yeah. So it's really cool to see that a solution has been imagined for that, and not necessarily that those dots were connected in the first place, but looking back at it now with our lenses, we can kind of see that. Ecotopia also features a 20-hour work week.
Oh, that's a dream. Oh, that's amazing.
Which kind of connects a lot with, conversations we're having right now about the 4-day work week.
Yeah.
And, automation should be helping us with our jobs, not creating more work or no work for some people.
Yeah.
But kind of the 20-hour work week really reinforces that healthy balance. And going back into work, this book also features worker-controlled businesses, so businesses owned and run by the workers themselves. Yeah. So, again, less away from that capitalism model. And one thing that I found really interesting about it is their technology system. So 1975, didn't have iPhones, but Ecotopia imagined a sort of video phone as part of a suite of technologies that had already been described as not addicting and therefore used sparingly. So this is technology that makes people's lives better, but doesn't come with any of the drawbacks that, again, are quite a big study about. Or there's quite a lot of studies right now about how our mental health is impacted by phone use and phone use addiction.
That's so interesting.
All this from 1975.
Yeah, that's what I'm interested by, the fact that the author was thinking about that at the time. Do you know anything? Because I don't think either of us have.
We haven't read Ecotopia.
No, because I'm interested to know how.
I'm on the wait list in the library.
Oh, yeah.
I read this and I was like, how could you not want to read that?
Yeah, I'm interested to know how he does that, how the tech is not addicting, what they do to it to make it.
Yeah.
What they include, what they don't include.
And I don't know how much detail it goes into, but it probably, we touched on positive psychology before. I would say the technology probably doesn't hijack human-specific psychological patterns to keep us using those devices. Yeah. It's just my preliminary thoughts on how we could deal with that.
Oh, that's fascinating. Well, I definitely have to read it now, so I guess I got to get on that library wait list.
Come join me.
Okay, Ecotopia. Okay, well, my first new one is The Green Place as a Solarpunk system from the Mad Max universe.
Wow, Australian cinema?
I know, I love to include Australian examples. So The Green Place, which is also known as the Place of Abundance, and it was once a fertile, peaceful area of the wasteland in the Mad Max series and the original home of the character Furiosa. And it's sort of this, when it's depicted as this canyon with water, trees, forests and grass amidst the surrounding irradiated desert. And so we actually don't know too much about it because it doesn't get much screen time. Most of the time it's just talked about. But in the most recent Mad Max movie, which is the prequel, Furiosa, which is a great film, by the way. If you haven't watched it, you should watch it.
I don't like how you looked at me. I feel very called out right
now. So in that movie, The Green Place is depicted as this area with lots of advanced homesteads and wind turbines and solar panels, and everyone is happy, and it's a utopia in the middle of the desert, basically, an oasis.
And even when it's off screen, is this the place people are trying to get to?
Yeah. So I haven't watched the older Mad Max movies in a while, but I know in the one before Furiosa, I think she's trying to get back to it.
Fury Road?
Yeah. That's where she's trying to get back to, but yeah. Oh, I don't want to say more because it kind of spoils the story a little bit.
Okay. So. No more coming for you. You're going to have to watch it yourself, including me. I'm going to have to watch it myself.
Yes. But again, depicted as a self-sufficient community living in harmony with nature, hence Solarpunk system.
Nice.
In Australia.
Let's go.
Yeah. And the second new example is Avalonia from Disney's Strange World movie, which was a bit of a flop. I haven't seen it. I've just heard like people talk about it, but I think it's got some really interesting and relevant Solarpunk ideas in it from my like understanding of it. So the premise is that it follows this family of explorers called the Clades who have to set aside their differences and embark on a journey to a mysterious subterranean land to save the miracle plant Pando, which is their society's source of energy.
Wow, I wonder what that could be a metaphor for.
Yes. Spoilers.
Oh, we are spoiling this
I'm
one.
spoiling it because I have to because, yeah.
Yeah.
They find out that Pando is actually a virus-like weed that is killing the creature that they live on.
Yeah, not really sure where that metaphor's going.
I wonder.
Fossil fuel?
And so instead of trying to save the energy source, they decide to destroy it. And that actually leads to a huge shift in the community's like entire way of life. And the community shifts from Pando energy to wind turbines, which is interesting. And other sort of solarpunky elements in the movie include its promotion of social justice and diversity. And we also see the characters play a little bit of a solarpunk board game in it. So the game is like a cooperative resource game. And in one of the scenes from the movie, you can see the youngest family member struggle to explain to his father and grandfather that there are no enemies in the game to destroy because they're very much like, who am I fighting? Like, who do I need to kill? And stuff. And the son is like, no, it's not about that. It's about working together and like finding a solution that's going to work for everybody, which is really cool.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I love that. And we definitely, in the solarpunk genre, don't have, we're not struggling to find game titles that relate to solarpunk. The game, particularly board games and video games, are an area where we see solarpunk ideals, not just in the theming, but also in, I guess, the actual mechanisms of the media itself. So more coming on that, not in this episode, but in a future episode.
Definitely.
Again, another pin for you to pick up and follow later.
I love this dropping of hints in this episode. This is great.
I feel like we're leaving Easter eggs, but the Easter egg is just like, we're so excited to share this information with you.
Yes. And just, so what's different about that, the movie Strange World, is that the environment isn't saved as a result of a bunch of like personal choices, but by people working together and fundamentally transforming the entire way a society operates. And it shows part of the transition period too, which you don't usually see in like solarpunk texts.
Yeah. Well, I'm sad that it was a flop, but it sounds like there are lots of great ideas in that movie, despite, how much marketing may or may not have been put behind it, and if watching it is actually an enjoyable experience or not.
So I've got one last sort of fictional solarpunky kind of system to talk about. It's not technically solarpunk, but it does have those elements in it again that I feel like are interesting to talk about, and that's actually the Shire and Hobbiton from Lord of the Rings.
Wow, honorable mention.
So, it's not something that I initially thought of, but then the more you sort of think about it, you're like, oh, actually, this has got some like interesting ideas in it that we could probably like take from and apply to real world systems. So it definitely like shares some aesthetic qualities with solarpunk. It's very much cottagecore vibes. And embodies some of the solarpunk principles too. And like I said, not a perfect match. An important part of the Shire is that it's idyllic and environmentally conscious. There's definitely an emphasis on self-sufficiency, community, and connection to nature. And of course, it's depicted as the safe haven away from everything else going on in Middle Earth. I wanted to include the famous opening line of The Hobbit.
Please do.
Which is, quote, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit, not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort." And I love this portrayal of nature as appealing, cozy, and home, rather than this thing that we need to be like fighting against. And so that's a very much like Solarpunk ethos there. So the interesting thing about hobbit holes, I really want to talk about hobbit holes, is that the underground dwellings use earth and locally sourced materials. And there's actually some stuff written about them today as eco-friendly and inherently energy efficient because of their like subterranean design, which like provides a natural insulation and reduces heating and cooling costs. And the design has in fact inspired real-world sustainable architecture, which like more on that later in the episode.
Is that Cooper Petey? We bring up Cooper Petey.
But I guess you could actually.
Love to drop it in now. Cooper Petey, town in Australia where for decades people have lived underground because it's so hot above ground. I actually got the chance to camp there a few months ago. Or, oh my goodness, over a year, 2 years ago.
Whoa.
Time. But it's a really, really cool system of housing that, you know, we see in fiction, but also once again in Australia.
That's interesting. Yeah, Cooper Petey, super cool.
Super cool.
I highly recommend if you're in Australia and can visit it. It is a little bit out of the way and hard to get to, but it's
worth it.
Yeah, it really is worth it. It's amazing. The other thing, aside from like the hobbit holes that Hobbiton and the Shire has going for it, that's kind of Solarpunk, is that it has hardly any government. So it's mainly self-governed and self-sufficient, and families living there for the most part manage their own affairs, and the only real official is the mayor, who oversees the postal services and the watch. But apart from that,
it's chill.
Yeah, it's pretty chill. So the part that makes it not Solarpunk is that it doesn't have futuristic technology. It's more of a pastoral, pre-industrial lifestyle before like the tech happens and before the revolutions and stuff. But I really wanted to include it because of like all the elements I talked about and also the positive psychology that's in it. And, you know, hobbit holes and connection to nature.
Yeah, and something on that I wanted to bring up that I've only just noticed is that we were here talking about fictional solarpunk systems, and for each of these fictional world stories, etc., I've just noticed all of your headings are the place name.
Oh,
like for every single one of them, the system we're talking about is the whole place.
Yes,
like the nature of solarpunk systems means that you can't really say like hobbit holes. You're actually talking about the whole of Hobbiton.
Yeah. Oh my God, I didn't realize that, but you're so right.
Yeah.
It's like
really
all
making my
those.
brain.
It's like systems within systems, isn't it?
Yeah. So we're not really pulling out, you know, even though, you know, with Ecotopia we pulled out the 20-hour work week. It's the fact that combines. It's the fact that combines, you know, with the worker-owned businesses and the technology that isn't addicting. Like all of that has to combine together in the place. Mm-hmm. So like place is so important, but it's also one of the only ways we can actually define a system because that system would hopefully be anywhere.
Yeah.
Anyway, that just made my brain tingle. I loved it.
That's great. Yeah.
So thanks for that. That was a really good deep dive into a lot of the future possibilities that fiction, you know, is presenting to us, pathways, plural, that we could choose to go down.
Yeah.
And some of them are attached to some real world things. Some of them are kind of based in those fictional worlds. But for our second segment, we're going to move into what are our current Solarpunk leaning systems? What is already in our world that with a little bit of tweaking actually would continue to be a Solarpunk system way into the future and that we can kind of use to get ourselves there. So heaps of exciting things to talk about here. Really hard to choose things for this segment too.
Yeah.
Because I think the point of Solarpunk is because it's supposed to be achievable, almost every system we currently have could be turned into a Solarpunk system. So we've picked out a few good selections for you. We hope you enjoy. And the first one that I wanted to talk about is Wikipedia.
Love Wikipedia.
As a Solarpunk community information system. And what I wanted to bring up here is that, you know, I think when we were in school, the idea was, hey, don't use Wikipedia. It's not very reliable. But actually, we've begun to see a lot of literature, including, you know, newspaper essays and the Wikimedia Foundation projects, and even some academic literature kind of start to suggest that Wikipedia might actually be such a valuable resource precisely because everyone can contribute to it. So everything you write, everything anyone ever writes has a bias. But the more people that contribute to it and the more people whose voices are heard, you know, kind of like the less biases that are there. And it kind of goes similar to the handbag theory, which is like a net theory, which is if I cast my net with my biases, some things, the things that I have biases, you know, maybe against, they're going to fall through my net. But if Isabel comes up and she casts her net with me, you know, those holes that are so gappy in my net, some of Isabel's net might catch that. So the more people you have adding to this information source, potentially the more reliable, potentially the less biased, and the more robust it becomes. And we're actually seeing that Wikipedia is a really great source of truth, particularly in an AI generated word slush world.
Yeah, look, it's so true. And it's also one of those which is getting harder and harder to access free to use resources.
Free to
as
edit.
well. Free to use, yeah.
Yeah, so we've kind of got that idea of like democratizing information systems, not just the information.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of my favorite new hobbies at the moment is to write Wikipedia pages. So, and you do, look, as much as some teachers, I don't know what they're saying in school now, but it was definitely the case, like what you were saying when we were in school, they were like, don't use it. It's not good.
It's actually a great way to start delving into a subject.
It's actually a really good starting point for stuff. And you do have to, when you're writing a Wikipedia page, you do have to include credible sources in it as well. And there are people who like go in and check that too. So it's got that wonderful crowdsourcing element to it, which actually brings me to my
segue.
Example of a current Solarpunk system, and that's our citizen science projects. Which
Wikipedia is kind of a citizen project.
I guess. Yeah.
But citizen science, so cool.
And again, it's a form of crowdsourcing. But on top of that, form of crowdsourcing that empowers community to participate in scientific research.
Oh, yeah.
Often with a focus on environmental issues, which is very like Solarpunk. Also very much promotes a form of technology for good. Like how can we use it in a good way to maybe like help a population of animals that's struggling or like, improve the environment. And the technology that's used for it is usually open source software that is available to everyone and not gate-capped, which is also happening in some technologies at the moment.
And in a lot of science.
Yeah, and in science too.
Yeah.
And so citizen science projects are projects like something as simple as using your phone to document insects and plants you find to help us build maps and track species numbers across the planet, also measuring local water quality with your phone camera, and even just something as simple as bird watching. All Solarpunk, I think, all part of the Solarpunk system.
Yeah, all Solarpunk, all beautiful, all helpful,
Yeah.
all fun. Like there's so many elements that go into it, which I think is part of what makes it a Solarpunk system.
Yeah.
Another one kind of similar, but not at all, actually. But I guess that's kind of the point with Solarpunk systems. They're all linked by, the people and the environment they serve and service. Right now, to be honest, taking public transport, in the act of taking public transport is kind of Solarpunk.
Yeah.
Sometimes I catch the bus and I think, wow, how Solarpunk of me to be using a community form of transport that is environmentally more sustainable than taking a car.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so good.
I mean, aren't a lot of our buses in Canberra electric now as well?
So we're leaning towards, where there's demand for it and where there's good, political reception to it, is that buses and trains and light rails, they're all becoming, better and better for the environment and for the community. The more robust the network is, the more up-to-date the technology is, particularly in terms of emissions and what type of energy source they use. But something that I noticed recently is that, particularly on local routes, like a bus is a form of community. If you catch at the same time every day, every week, you start to recognize the people. You might start to have a really good relationship with your bus driver. Shout out to Simon, my favorite bus driver. And I think it reinforces a lot of the ideals of Solarpunk.
Yeah, for sure.
Obviously, it's controlled centrally at the moment, so it's not a fully Solarpunk system. But I think, and I hope that in the age of Solarpunk, or in the age of a more positive future, that public transportation is going to be one of those things that remains, and we can kind of look back through the history of transportation and see its echoes into the past, which are right now is where we are. So it makes me a little bit happy every time I catch the bus. So I hope it makes you a bit happy every time you take the train or the bus or whatever your local form of public transport is.
I mean, like even cycling too, right? I mean, it's not as communal, but still.
Yeah, but it's definitely hitting a lot of those like same points. Yeah, and you can cycle communally. Like you can.
That's true.
You can have a community kind of vibe about it.
Yeah.
Like those cycling school buses where there's like an adult who leads it and it's like a specific route along a neighborhood, and other kids, they drive past all these houses and other children join them as the cycling group goes along. They make, if you ever want a little bit of optimism or positivity in a day, look up one of those videos and watch and see how beautiful those moments are. And being outside too, the walking from the bus, the cycling, makes me think of rewilding.
Yes. Yeah.
Not my epicest segue, but I do want to talk about rewilding as an action, an activity, a movement that's happening right now that is so Solarpunk. Isabel mentioned it at the top of this episode. Like that type of system is just like exactly what we're looking for.
Yeah.
So some things at the top of this: what is rewilding? How can we take something that was wild, is now no longer wild, and rewild it? These are all lots of really good conversations happening in the space right now. I've got a quote from some literature that kind of explains that wilderness is not understood as the absence of people, but in terms of non-human agency, which can be embraced and promoted without vilifying human activities. So in rewilding, it doesn't mean that humans can't be involved, but we're kind of giving into that non-human agency. It's not the act of planting trees and rows, but trying to bring back what was wild by similar sorts of non-human agency.
Yeah.
There's so much great literature on it.
I mean, like it's that whole thing again about not fighting nature, but like working with it.
And welcoming it and saying, actually, hang on, this space is missing that. There's another great quote here by Ferrell, or from Ferrell by George Monabot, which says, "Through his eyes, we see environmental success and begin to envision a future world where humans and nature are no longer separate and antagonistic, but are together part of a single healing world. And if that quote doesn't sound solarpunk to you, maybe because it's missing the technology aspect, I think it resonates a lot with me as to how we get to solarpunk. And there's so much literature on this space, a lot about non-human agency, a lot about how you can rewild even urban spaces. You know, we've got concepts such as bee corridors or pollinator corridors in cities that allow bees, butterflies, other insects that pollinate to have pathways to the city so that cities can still be alive, buzzing. Yeah. So if you grow tomatoes on your city balcony, they might still have a chance of, being pollinated and ripening properly. And a lot of that Rewilding the Urban Soul by Claire Dunn is actually a Melbourne-based and Australian-focused rewilding project.
Australia again.
I know. There's so many cool things in this area. And it's such a big movement that people have begun doing economic studies into showing that it actually is really, really viable economically. And that great. Rewilding can be favourable in some ways to existing or new economic sectors, such as tourism and employment, how it can help people who are looking for wild food or who are foraging to, supplement or support their diet, how rewilding can actually work with agricultural pest removal through wild predators. Despite that there are actually strong tensions between agriculture and rewilding, they're kind of a little bit in opposition to each other because of the human agency element. And rewilding we also see is often presented as congruent with economic development. And there's also this thing called passive rewilding, which when it includes forest regrowth, you might see things such as large mammals coming back to an area.
Oh, okay.
So you kind of see like those ongoing effects and the snowball of momentum, where if you try to do one thing, you actually see the wild perhaps coming back to a project that maybe even wasn't supposed to be rewilding in the first place, but it can be.
It's kind of like what happened during COVID, right? When everyone was like at home more and not traveling as much and not using buildings as much. And we started to see like nature restore itself.
Yeah. Have you ever seen those pictures too of like abandoned railway tracks or buildings and they're covered in greenery and growth and they're kind of being not like taken back into the earth, but they kind of look otherworldly because they're so not recognizable through loss of functionality to us. Yeah. But, maybe they're a really, really good physical support structure to other plants or animals or fungi. So you can really see that non-human agency start to benefit, or the non-human agents starting to benefit from those instances. Oh, it's so cool.
But so is your next Solarpunk system example.
Okay. Okay, everybody. Hear me out. Solarpunk is a music genre, and within that there's this other thing called eco-grime, which we're not going to get too into. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that we do see this emerging solarpunk genre in music, and not only does that refer to the sonic environmental activism or the sensorial sustainability of solarpunk music, but solarpunk music as a vehicle, like music as a vehicle for solarpunk actions. So there's a lot to explore here. And I'm going to build up and I'm going to take you somewhere that you don't expect this to go. That's my promise to you. So solarpunk music can be described as music that seeks to convey and not just communicate the potential for optimistic futures. So it's not just about, does it sound like the earth is speaking, but is it actually communicating something more than that? Is there a message through it? And through this genre and through this mindset, one shining example has made itself very clear in the genre, in the literature, and that is New Zealand or Aotearoa's most famous artist, I would argue, Lorde, and her recent release, Solar Power.
Yeah.
So this song and kind of the whole album that goes along with it can be seen as solarpunk through its music and its lyrics. But it goes further than that. And the album's strongest solarpunk credential isn't the lyrics, it isn't the music, but it's actually how this album was distributed. And it was a direct result of Lorde the artist's attempt to subvert the giant machine of the music industry.
Yeah.
So this song didn't have a CD release. Instead, fans of the artist could order a biodegradable, recyclable music box release that came with artifacts inside it, including a digital code to download the song. And the artifacts in this box, it's so cool. I cannot convey to you how cool this was and how much we fangirled when we were in the library discussing this.
Yeah.
But the artifacts inside this box harness solarpunk speculative methods. So they harness like fictional future methods, detailing Lorde as an energy consultant for the fictional International Solar Institute New Zealand division. Representing her as trying to have a say in this energy justice transition statement, etc. And that's so cool. So this music box represents a really powerful example of artistic agency, of one singular artist saying, let's do things differently, and actually pulling it off despite how entrenched conditions are within the music industry. And, the literature kind of talks about this as a powerful example of artistic agency that's exercised still within the confines of contractual obligations, as a solarpunk wrench thrown into the giant machine. And we can kind of see this as one step away from the system we seem to be stuck in. Like, this is a step towards a more solarpunk music industry.
Yeah. You know what? I wish that this got more like attention than it did, because I knew that she released that album and that song was popular and stuff, but I had no idea about all of this extra like layers that she'd added to it.
And it's like layers for her fans that directly go into solarpunk. And, the track itself has been called solarpunk, earthy and organic in its sound. It's said to be sonically encompassing elements like water, sun, and air, that it's bright, light, and airy with an optimistic streak that challenges the conflation of misery with credibility.
Yeah, I read something actually this morning about it, and it wasn't just that track either, but it was the whole album having that sort of sound, and it was really interesting because it was an entire like shift away from her previous album Melodrama, which was like the total opposite, and it was more like grungy and
so we've seen kind of like the move from grunge to eco optimism, which is exactly what I reckon I need right now.
A lot of us need it.
And it's really interesting that there's a lot of language in this album that really is like ripe and full of representing Lorde's environmental concerns. So you kind of get that not only, again, is it got the sound, but it actually has a message to say. Which is not at all similar, but I did want to briefly talk about Pitbull's climate change song theming through all of his album. So, like, he has like climate change, global warming albums. He's called himself Mr. Worldwide. He's got like a few songs that kind of relate to like fire and destruction and climate change, but at the same time it's still kind of like all about like dancing and babes. I don't know. It's weird. Mr. Pitbull, Mr. Worldwide, I'm confused by your messaging. I would love you to head a little more in Lorde's direction. The fact that you called your albums climate change and separately global warming makes me feel like you have something to say. So I'd love to hear you say it. And if you happen to be listening to this podcast
in a more coherent way, say it in a more coherent way.
Please hear my plea.
That's so funny because I would never have like interpreted it that way. But there you go.
There you go.
Solarpunk music.
Yeah.
So cool.
Okay, Isabel, I need you to pull us out of this weird pit that I've kind of dug for us.
Well, I'm also going to like give you a break from talking too. We're both like managing that for each other this episode and getting used to just the two of us again. So
yes, welcome to season 3.
Okay, so I think the last current real world example we're going to talk about in this section are eco buildings and architecture and eco villages. So to sort of kick us off, some gardens are actually kind of solarpunk. And so I'm talking about the vertical garden in Milan, Bosco Verticale, which is actually used as an image in a lot of solarpunk like articles and like news media today.
But it's a real place.
And it's real, yeah. And it's this complex of 2 residential skyscrapers with over 90 plant species growing on it.
Wow. That's actually quite a biodiverse array.
And it's very much intentional because it's part of a project of metropolitan reforestation. And it's also the world's first oxygen positive skyscraper.
Wow.
Fascinating, right? Go Italy.
Go Italy. More of that, please.
Was like not expecting that, but there you go. And another solarpunk garden are the botanical gardens and gardens by the bay in Singapore. I know Ella has told me before that Singapore is very much solarpunk ready.
Yeah, and they're kind of positioning themselves as that solarpunk futuristic enviro-leaning city.
Yes.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, so their botanic gardens are one of only 3 botanic gardens with UNESCO World Heritage status, which is interesting. And Gardens by the Bay was part of Singapore's plan to transform its quote-unquote garden city to a quote-unquote city in the garden. I love that, reframing.
Yeah.
And that's with the aim of raising the quality of life by enhancing greenery and flora in the city. Very solarpunk system.
Yeah, love it.
Okay, moving from gardens to architecture.
Yes, please.
Earthship architecture.
Okay, I have heard of this before.
Yeah, so this is something that I've come across recently, and it's this style developed by someone called Michael Reynolds in the late 20th century to early 21st century, so it's very recent, and it's designed to behave as passive solar earth shelters and off-the-grid ready houses. They kind of look like hobbit holes. Well, actually, hobbit hole meets Tatooine.
Yeah, it's very hybrid. Like they're kind of made out of what? Almost entirely recyclable materials. Normally like a bigger community comes together and you all build like one house for one family together.
Yeah, so they're made of natural and upcycled materials. They're designed to withstand the extreme temperatures of a desert, and they stay at about 21 degrees Celsius regardless of outside weather conditions.
Wow, that's a bit of a dream.
I know, it's cool. So the first Earthship communities were actually built in the desert of New Mexico, but now it's expanded to small communities all over the world, including Australia.
Wow, another one.
Yeah, and sometimes this is despite legal opposition to its construction and adoption. So sometimes people are like, you shouldn't build that.
And it is built anyway.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, and eco-villages, which kind of builds on from what I was saying about like architecture and eco-architecture. So these are communities all over the world, again, that aim to be more environmentally and socially sustainable and incorporate some of the technology that we've talked about so far in this episode. And I thought I would give a couple examples. The first one is called Findhorn Eco Village in Scotland, of all places. So this community has a really low ecological footprint and is super focused on sustainable solutions to the world's crises and reconnecting humans to nature and spirituality. It has these funny dwellings called whiskey barrel houses.
That's a great name.
I know, it's great. Which are these timber vats that have been recycled into these, again, quirky hobbit-like houses. So that's pretty cool. And actually, in November last year, so November 2024, it was bought out entirely by its community residents, introducing a full democracy for the first time within it.
That's pretty hype.
Yeah, super cool. And my second example is called Earth Haven, and it's a mountain forest near Asheville in North Carolina. And again, it's a small minimalist dwellings and permaculture design, and also governed by a democratic committee structure, and currently aspires to be racially and culturally diverse. But I think this one is kind of more earlier stages than the Scottish one. And there's also plenty of pockets of eco-villages in other places like South America, and countries like Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, Argentina, and also some in Australia too.
Oh yeah.
But I'm going to save those for later, for a future episode potentially. Wink, wink.
Nudge, nudge.
We have so many cool
things happening right now that are leading us towards this solarpunk, more sustainable, more just future. So cool.
Yeah.
So I hope that was really, I don't know, not even aspiring or aspirational to listen to, but I hope it makes you feel more positive that change is already happening. And we didn't even touch on any renewable form of energy.
No.
Which, there's a lot of good in the world to talk to that point right now. Yeah. Catch that actually in the last episode of season 2. We talk with Isaac Martin about sustainability, energy, the future of that. But there's so much out there not even having to touch on that, which is really great to hear. So far we've gone from fictional solarpunk systems to current solarpunk-like systems. And now we're taking you one step further into the future with future systems. So these are systems that are developed from our current systems, some of which you may have just spoken about. And we're going to talk to you now explicitly about how they might pretty realistically lead to a solarpunked world.
Yes. Yeah.
And the first thing that we're going to bring up here is going back to the concept of rewilding, and specifically talking about rewilding of the internet.
Yeah.
So this kind of idea, this future hopeful, it might be in the next 10 years. Like, it's not actually that far away that this could happen. But a rewilded internet would build off our current internet systems. It would take notes from our best systems, such as Wikipedia, and, it would be a rewilding to make the internet kind of like less crap. So maybe not so dominated by brands or algorithms that are designed to hijack your personal brain psychology.
Yeah.
But instead maybe be a form of digital gardening. And digital gardening kind of goes with this idea of rewilding, which is where you make a part of the internet your own, cultivate your own seeds of knowledge, and then let them fly.
Oh.
Such beautiful wording. There's a lot of great thought here, and we'll link to some things on our Instagram so you can follow through and explore a little more. We'll also link to it on Mastodon and LinkedIn. But this method of thinking, the digital gardening, is a little colonial, so that's kind of my only gripe with it. But when you bring it into the line of rewilding, thinking of like a free and beautiful internet landscape sounds really great to me. I kind of feel like we had a little bit of paradise with the internet. It kind of feels like, I don't know, sometimes it just feels a little bit bad when you're on the internet for too long. And I think some of that's because it's not what it was initially meant to be. Isabel, I hear you have thoughts on this topic.
There's a lot of like brain rot and all of that sort of takes up a lot of the space on the internet now, unfortunately. But this whole concept of rewilding the internet, I think, actually brings it back to Tim Berners-Lee's original vision for the World Wide Web.
Yeah.
Because he very much wants it to be, and wanted it to be when he started it, an open system and a creative space that isn't dominated by any central power or big corporations, which is, sadly what it's becoming.
Yeah.
And he's always been a really, really big believer in this and is always like fighting for it, continues to fight for it. I have a quote from him from 2018 where he said, quote, "The web that many people connected to years ago is not what new users will find today. What was once a rich selection of blogs and websites has been compressed under the powerful weight of a few dominant platforms. This concentration of power creates a new set of gatekeepers, allowing a handful of platforms to control which ideas and opinions are seen and shared. What's more, the fact that power is concentrated among so few companies has made it possible to weaponize the web at scale," which is really sad. It's so true what he's saying. And then he went on to kind of expand on this a year later in 2019, which was during the 30-year history of the World Wide Web, where he said, quote, "While the web has created opportunity, given marginalized groups a voice and made our daily lives easier, it has also created opportunity for scammers, given a voice to those who spread hatred and made all kinds of crime easier to commit. Also, ad-based revenue models that commercially reward clickbait and the viral spread of misinformation. It's understandable that many people feel afraid and unsure if the web is really a force for good, but given how much the web has changed in the past 30 years, it would be defeatist and unimaginative to assume that the web as we know it can't be changed for the better in the next 30. If we give up on building a better web now, then the web will not have failed us. We will have failed the web," which I think is a really powerful quote. From him.
Like shivers down the spine.
I just got them too, and it's very Solarpunk way of thinking as well.
Yeah, and I just looked it up so I don't butcher it, but it really reminded me of this quote, again, by Ursula Le Guin.
Queen, yeah.
And this quote gives me a lot of hope when I feel like, trying to create change is doomed, like it's not going to work. And the quote goes, "We live in capitalism. Its power seems escapable. So did the divine right of kings." And I think in terms of like rewilding the internet and coming back to a system we've had before, it shows that we've gone through a massive period of change.
Yeah.
And we can do it again for the better. It doesn't have to only benefit the few.
Yeah.
Like the divine right of kings.
Yes,
so,
definitely.
I love talking about this topic because it just makes you feel so happy and good afterwards.
Yes.
Steering us away from that rewilding the internet future system, I want us to talk about the potential of a future system that is a non-monetary system.
This is an interesting one.
Yeah. So again, it was spoken a little bit about in one of those rewilding texts by Claire Dunn. And she says she envisages a non-monetary economy. And she said, this version of an economy is far more involved and nuanced, which I think goes to explain perhaps why we're not currently in this type of economy, but it doesn't mean we can't get there.
Yeah, and I think there are a few different ways of doing it, and there is some fiction that explores how we could do it. And so coming back to Monk and Robot and Panga.
Yes, please.
And I think I did briefly talk about this in our Solarpunk episode in season 1, but they have this thing called PEBS, which is a non-currency, I guess is what you could call it. And the world uses a sharing or giving economy. So it's not money, trade or barter, but kind of like a communal and supportive system rather than strictly transactional. And so the PEBS, or the value of goods and services, is determined by a communal assessment rather than a standard exchange rate. And it's definitely built to reward and thank others for their services with PEBS, not punish people for needing things. And something really interesting about it is if someone has a negative balance or a low balance, it's not seen as a bad thing, but recognize that that person actually just needs a little more help at the moment, and that someone just needs to give them a little more PEBS.
Yeah, so it's a tool, but not necessarily just for transactions, also to check in on people.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. As well as fictional ways we've seen non-monetary systems, there's also some current non-monetary systems that I would hope a future more holistic non-monetary system would build off of. And that's things like buy nothing Facebook groups where people post what they might have in abundance, and someone who might need it will ask to collect it, and they're often really localized, which is really great in terms of like further transport emissions. I really love that. You also kind of like see this non-monetary economy in membership systems, and these can be, you know, a membership system out of a library where you borrow books for free under the agreement that you will give them back at a certain time, or even tool libraries. Where they might even be not even, you know, government library affiliated. They might be libraries of collectives of people who have tools and want to share them with the community, which is really cool.
Yeah.
You know, we've also seen like the olden days bartering system. That was technically non-money, but it's not necessarily non-currency.
Yeah.
Like the bartering was kind of that form. Something discussed in this book by Anitra Nelson. The book is called Beyond Money, a Post-Capitalist Strategy. She envisions a post-money version of the future moving instead towards a care economy. Which is really cool. And a quote from this book says, "Money is not simply a tool. Rather, money as we know it refers to codes of conduct that structure societal relations critical to the operation and reproduction of capitalism. For this reason, money is a significant barrier to imagining a world beyond capitalism." So many good thoughts from this book. This is also on my to-read list. She has a chapter in the book called System Change, Not Climate Change.
Oh, cool.
Which I think fully speaks to this episode, the systems we see that underpin all the worlds that we do have, want to have, could have.
Yeah.
And that chapter asks, how does our relationship with money abstract us from nature? So is actually currency a barrier to a solarpunk world?
Yeah. Oh my God, I really want to read
so many good ideas.
I really, really want to read this book now.
There's so much to go into there. I just want to drop that kind of as a thought of a system away from the one we currently have. Some fiction has tried to do that as well. I know we touched on PEBs quickly at the start, but also in Star Trek they have a post-money society, but it's weird because there's like vestigial sentences that sound as if they still have money, but they don't. So they might say like, you owe me a drink, or like you'll buy, like you're buying if they go into the space bar, but there's kind of no currency. So it's like a little bit of a weird hangover. Yeah. So I don't feel like that version of the future is quite realized. And we also see Thomas More's Utopia from 1516.
Oh, wow. Okay. Old. Yeah.
In that story, Thomas More imagines a world that functions entirely without money.
Oh my God. In 1516.
Yeah. Wow. So I just wanted to point out that again, like, we didn't have it. We do have it. That's true. We can go to a post-currency society in the future. And that could be a solarpunk one, considering, as Anitra Nelson discusses, money keeps us in a capitalist society, which solarpunk pretty much inherently opposes.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. You thought that blew your mind. I've got one last example. Oh, yes. Okay. One last example. And this comes from a thesis on Mars by Michael Aaron Lindquist. And I had a fascinating time reading his thesis. In which, in the final kind of like act of this thesis, after talking about how we could be on Mars, he talks about solarpunk as a precondition of space settlement. Now, if you've seen our season 1 episode on colonialism and board games in space, you'll know that these ideas of colonialism in space and terraforming Mars are really inherently tied together.
Yeah.
And I read this gorgeous thesis by Michael Lindquist, who said that if we're going to settle in space, solarpunk should be a precondition of it.
Yes.
And obviously he's done a lot of deep thinking. He's written a whole thesis. And he has these ideas that solarpunk cannot be ahistorical. The genre recognizes history and domination, seeking to address it through defining itself in relation to aspirational decolonization, anti-sexism, and anti-racism activisms. So to make a Mars or otherwise off-Earth settlement solarpunk, it would need to have established sensitivities, cultures, and politics that will prevent the extension of our current systems. So I just thought that was like a really interesting exploration of how solarpunk would apply to a future where we're no longer on Earth.
Yeah.
And for it to be solarpunk, it would have to say no to a lot of the biases that we have through recognizing history, which I thought was just actually a really good summarization of solarpunk itself, all the systems chat we've been having in this episode, and pointing to the future, because solarpunk doesn't have to just be on Earth. It doesn't have to just be humans.
Yeah. That's such a good point. And I think that's like a lovely way to sort of wrap up this section. And yeah. Wow, the future is bright, everybody.
The future is bright and Solarpunk Systems can help make it brighter.
Yeah. And I think now we're going to move on to a new section. We're introducing this season, which is our good news bit.
Yes.
Some good news from the world of climate action.
So the world perpetuates a lot of miserable, negative stories right now. They capture our attention really effectively, but it's also really important that we hear the good that's happening as well. Yeah. So unlike any of the earlier sections, this will not be fictional. No. This is not in the future. This is good news happening right now in the world that we can be happy for and thankful for.
Yeah.
The story that I'd love to share first is that it has been revealed and surfaced in the news recently that 2024 was a huge year for renewable energy.
Yeah, it was.
So 2024 was the first time since the 1940s where 40%, so that's almost half, 40% of global electricity was clean energy.
That's incredible.
And so this is the highest year on record since the 1940s, and that was a time where globally we use significantly less energy than we do now. Yeah. Particularly in 2024, we've got a lot of technology using a lot of energy, and 40% of those energy needs are being met by clean energy providers. Solar is the quickest growing source here of this renewable energy or clean energy. The largest provider was hydropower. So that old form of clean energy is still coming in clutch for us.
Yeah,
quite stable. And this is the official source for this good news is from the global energy think tank Ember. So Ember Energy. And we'll put a link so that you can go have a look at the report yourself. The graphs from that are quite striking and make me feel a lot better about the state of the world and the planet, which is really, really, really good.
Yes, I love seeing those visuals where you realize, wow, okay, like rapid change is happening and like in a good way. And
and it can continue.
Yeah, it's just going to keep getting better. Yeah, so my good news bit, I was never going to beat Ella's one. But
it's a huge piece. I'm sorry. I did steal that immediately.
But I guess kind of related to what you were saying, coal power plants are closing everywhere at the moment. So in April of this year, Finland closed its last coal power plant.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. There's been a huge surge in wind power in Finland in recent years, which has totally collapsed the fossil fuel industry over there. Just to give some like statistics, since 2020, coal power has plummeted by 73% in Finland and gas power by 82%.
Oh, that's so huge. I love it.
Yeah. And this is actually thanks to the Finnish Parliament's 2019 law to ban coal from 2029, which sent a really strong signal to utilities and investors to like prompt change. And this has not only cut their emissions, but actually strengthened energy security and boosted their economic growth as a country too. And, you know, a similar thing happened in the UK recently too, because they closed their last coal power plant in September 2024.
Wow. And just like this whole episode where we've been talking about systems, when one good thing happens, the chain of reaction goes off. So, you know, seeing that cut in emissions, strengthening the energy security, boosting economic growth, like that's so good to hear all of that in conjunction with each other too.
Yes.
So the good news stories are actually better than sometimes they might even appear.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, what a great first episode, Ella.
Oh, and we had so much to talk about. So thanks for sticking with us through this longer one. I hope you are excited for the future episodes we've hinted at throughout this one. And we do want to leave you with some questions for you to think about as you finish the walk you might be on listening to this, or the drive, or cleaning, or whatever it is you do while you listen to SciBurst.
Yeah.
And we'd love to ask you, what kind of Solarpunk systems would you like to see in the future? And what have you come across already?
Yeah, we'd love to know. Let us know on our socials at sci_burst. We're on most platforms, or via our Gmail. Stay nerdy, everybody.
Stay nerdy, and we
will see you next time.
Absolutely.